Please welcome Jovita Neliupshiene, Ambassador of the European Union to the United States. Please welcome Jovita Neliupshiene, Ambassador of the European Union to the United States. Please welcome Jovita Neliupshiene, Ambassador of the European Union to the United States.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the European Union's Defense Night in Washington, D.C. I'm truly excited to have so many distinguished defense experts and industry leaders here tonight with us in this unique event marking the European Union's growing role in defense. A special thanks for our partner Semafor for hosting us in this beautiful Gallup building, and of course my dear neighbor Justin Smith. And to other partners, European Investment Bank Group, Airbus, Rheinmetall, for making this event happening tonight. And I'd like to thank Gillian Manus for dedicating her time in organizing some of our side events. This year marks 80 years since the Allied victory in Europe, a milestone that shaped our democracies on both sides of the Atlantic. Post-war efforts like the Marshall Plan helped to build the continent. Out of that legacy, the European Union was born, an enduring project for peace and unity. Today, as Europe again faces conflict, the EU is rising to the moment and allocating over $1 trillion to boosting European defense capabilities. We will hear more about it just in a moment. But before talking the defense, let's pause on the word of peace. I would like to start this evening by honoring our special guest who personally fought for the peace across Atlantic.
Please welcome to the stage a true American hero, World War II veteran and distinguished guest, Dr. Alester Brown.
Dr. Brown, I would like to thank you full-heartedly for your service in Europe. You were among the first to come when there was a need. Thank you for fighting the peace and making the European project possible And it's really my honor tonight to present this award on behalf of the European Union in the United States.
As a 101-year-old individual coming from the South originally, I am thankful to Almighty God to be present and share this experience with you. 2 or 3 days ago, I was in Philadelphia with my fraternity brothers. There were 4,200 of us, and we enjoyed the city. The same thing is true here. I really appreciate receiving this gift, and I thank God Almighty for doing what you're doing in your institution.
So with that, with the honor, thank you, Dr. Brown, again, for the possibility to have the peace in Europe, democracy in Europe, and freedom of choice. And let me start the EU Defense Night 2.0. Welcome.
Please welcome Andrius Kubilius, European Union Commissioner for Defence and Space.
Dear all, dear guests, participants, from the United States, from Europe, really it's a great pleasure to be here and to enjoy European Defence Night in order to speak about European defence real morning. We're waking up and we're doing really big things. I would like to start my words with some kind of self-congratulation. I am the first European Commissioner for Defence and Space to visit Washington, D.C. Because the European Union never had an European Commissioner for Defence, never. The fact that the Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, created this post last year is a sign that times have changed, a sign that Europe has changed. Times have changed because we in Europe are under threat. Putin is a clear and present danger. Russia is ramping up its war machine, is producing weapons around the clock. Russia produces the same amount of ammunition in 3 months as all NATO countries in 1 year, including the United States. European intelligence services publicly say Russia will be ready to challenge NATO in 3 to 5 years' time. The German intelligence service recently said that they have evidence, not only prediction, that the Kremlin is discussing such plans. A very impressive warning last week was given by US European Command and NATO Allied Forces Commander in Europe, General Alexis Grinkiewicz, who said that the NATO alliance must prepare for the possibility that Russia and China could launch wars in Europe and the Pacific simultaneously, with 2027 being a potential flashpoint year. I came here to say, first of all, Europe is preparing to take responsibility for its own defense. You asked us to do that, and finally, we are moving ahead. Second, I want to tell that we are recognizing that you Americans have really the right and the reason, in the longer-term perspective, to start to shift more and more towards the Indo-Pacific in order to mitigate Chinese rising military power. And you have the right to ask us to take responsibility on European defense. And we Europeans need to accept such an American position as logical, and that is the reason why we need to take our own logical conclusion. We need to be ready to take such a responsibility, especially when we see that the Russians are becoming more and more aggressive. It means that we Europeans need to ramp up our defense capabilities. That is what we are doing. Not only because Americans have been demanding us to do so since long ago, but also because we see a clear and present danger of the possibility of Putin's aggression. We are preparing ourselves to take responsibility, and for that we need to build our own capacities, independent capacities. Our preparations go with a big bang ambition. The decisions which this Commission and Member States made on defense during the first 8 months of the Commission mandate are in some way unprecedented. I will try very briefly to name some of them. The Commission recently approved strategy of our responsibility, the white paper on the future of European defense. Also, we were urgently implementing a totally new program, Rearm European Union, approved by the Commission, with new possibilities for European Member States to spend an additional 800 billion euros for defense during the next 4 years, including very attractive European so-called safe loans of 150 billion euros in value. Just last week, the Commission approved the draft of the next multi-annual budget for the years 2028-2035, and it includes 5 times bigger spending for defense and space as we have now, up to 131 billion euros. Recently, as you know, European members of NATO agreed to spend 3.5% of GDP for real defense. Additionally, 1.5% for items related to defense, for example, military mobility. In total, 5% of GDP. This target will be achieved in 2035. In addition, recently we approved a very ambitious omnibus on simplification in defense, which cuts the time for authorities to give permits for the expansion of defense industrial facilities from 4 years down to 2 months. Now we are preparing plans of delivery, how to move towards the contracts, production and supply of what was agreed as NATO capability targets, especially in the areas of strategic enablers and European-wide flagship projects like Air Defence Shield or Eastern Border Defence Shield. Later on, in the autumn, we are planning to come with a roadmap for modernization of our defense industry and communication on military mobility. So, this is evidence that we in the European Union are serious about taking responsibility on our shoulders. Because of our preparation for such a responsibility, big European money is starting to come into European defense. The majority of the money will come from EU member states' national defense spending, and as I said before, European members of NATO agreed to spend 3.5% of GDP for real defense. Let's look a little bit more deeply into that financial perspective. My very simple prediction is that European member states will spend an average around 3% of GDP during the 2028-2035 period, which is our next multi-annual budget period, which means around 60 billion euros will be spent per year, nearly $700 billion, or 40.2 trillion euros, almost $5 trillion during the whole period of 2028-2035 will be spent for defense in Europe by Europeans. We can predict that according to NATO standards, around 50% of that amount, which means around 2 trillion euros, will be spent for real investment in defense equipment. Member states will spend their defense money where they will decide. It will not be regulated by the Commission or other European Union institutions. Member states can procure from the United States, from South Korea, or from Ukraine, not only from the EU, and that is their sovereign decision. Why I am saying that? Because sometimes we hear complaints from our transatlantic partners that Europeans will no longer procure any American weapons. There is no basis for American industry complaints of that sort, that they will be prohibited to participate in European contracts. Member states will spend their 2 trillions wherever they will decide, and I guess quite a lot in the United States, since already today, European countries are spending in the US around 40% of their national defense money. From another side, Americans are procuring only 1% of their weapons from European industries, despite the fact that European production is very competitive and is able to win in other countries against American competitors. American industry should not worry that during 2028-2035, the European Commission will implement EDIP-type programs to support European defense industry, which is, of course, our legitimate interest. The whole multi-annual budget for such a support will be less than 100 billion euros for the whole period of 7 years. There is no reason for Americans to complain about EDIP orientation to European industry, since 100 billion for the EU defense program is 20 times less than 2 trillion euros of national defense spending, which will stay totally unregulated. In addition to that, we need to remember that the United States defense industry also will have the possibility to participate in SAFE or EDIP programs in the same way as other third countries like Great Britain or Canada are ready to do. There are clear rules for those programs, and our partners are implementing those rules. The biggest challenge for defense industry on both sides of the Atlantic will not be to get the orders from European governments, because the big orders will come. The biggest challenge will be to meet those orders and produce in mass and on time. From the European point of view, as I see it, American defense industry at the moment has only one problem in Europe, and it's called ITAR. The rules that place potential restriction on use of American-produced weapons. And the problem is related with the European perception of American credibility. If Putin armies come, we cannot go into a fight with the possibility that our hands can be tied behind our backs. That is the reason European defense companies are already going to member states using, I would say, very inventive marketing. They are selling defense products saying that the product is ITAR-free. It's like selling soda sugar-free or potato chips fat-free. Well, all of us, we are human beings. We like to criticize others, much more than ourselves. I see my task to seek for constructive dialogue with transatlantic partners. Europeans should not blame Americans that they are asking us to take responsibility on European defense. Americans should not blame us that we want to strengthen European defense industry in order to take this responsibility. That is why my most important message today is very simple. I see the strategic need for both sides to have a rational dialogue and agreement on a timeline and tasks which both of us need to implement in order for Europe to be ready to take responsibility on our shoulders. For such an agreed plan, we need to have a clear understanding what American capabilities, which they now are providing for security of Europe, we shall need to replace at what time and how much it will cost. Such an agreed plan will allow us in the future to avoid any kind of misunderstandings or unexpected and unpredicted developments. And before finishing, my last message. We must defend Ukraine. Let's remember that the European Union and United States annually are spending less than 0.1% of their respective GDP for military support of Ukraine. That's not a lot compared to the 3.5% we agreed with NATO to spend on our real defense. Having that in mind, we created a special possibility for safe loans to be used together with Ukraine, procuring from Ukraine, and for the defense needs of Ukraine. I hope that it will be a new breakthrough in our support to Ukraine. And Ukraine, with its battle-tested army and battle-tested, very innovative defense industry, is a very valuable asset for European security. We need to learn a lot from Ukraine in preparing ourselves for the wars of tomorrow and how to innovate in defense. Ukraine needs to be part of European security architecture. Last week, together with the government of Ukraine, we created a special joint platform, Brave Tech EU, in order to develop joint innovative defense projects and to test them in the battlefield. That is how our industries will learn a lot. Our ability to defend Ukraine will certainly influence what China will decide to do in Taiwan. As General Grinkiewicz rightly stressed, I quote, "Each of these threats that are out there, Russian and Chinese threats, cannot be viewed, in my estimation, as discrete challenges. We have got to think about how all of them are aligning." End of quote. So in Ukraine, what is at stake is not only the future of Ukraine and Europe, but of the whole world, including the United States. And finally, it is clear that to deter aggression and prevent war, Europe and America must stand together. And I know we will, as real and equal partners. Thanks a lot.
Joining Andreas Kubilius, please welcome Gina Chon, Executive Editor for Semafor.
But then you need one as well. Thank you, Commissioner, for those thoughtful and thought-provoking remarks. You've been here on your first visit to the U.S. in this role. I wanted to first ask you what you hope to accomplish while you're here, especially given the roller coaster ride that Ukraine and EU member countries have been on in the last few months, with weapons deliveries being halted, now fast-tracked. We've seen the commitment from countries. You mentioned the 5% of GDP spending. What are your goals while you are in town?
Well, thanks a lot. My goal is very simple: to inform our American partners what we're doing in Europe, in order for us to have better understanding of what are our plans, and really to agree on any kind of transitions if they will be needed. Again, I will mean that for us what is important is to understand what American longer-term plans are towards Europe, and to be ready together to prepare for those implementation of those plans, bringing European defense up to the level which is needed for that. So that's my major task, to speak around, to speak with the industries, also because opportunities for defense industries in Europe are becoming very, very big ones. And we hear and we see a lot of interest from other countries. For example, recently we signed agreements with Great Britain and Canada on so-called defense and security partnership, and Canadian and British industries are looking into possibilities to be equalized to European industries in our implementation of our EU programs. So that's what we are trying to speak out and to speak also with American industries.
Well, and you talked about in your speech and in previous comments about this new 5% of GDP spending goal, but you've also been critical of European countries when it comes to their spending for Ukrainians' defense mechanisms, and why countries aren't spending more, because Ukraine is that line of defense for Europe. How do you square that with the fiscal pressures that certain EU countries are facing, such as Germany and France, and elsewhere in terms of slower growth and domestic pressures, with how much you think they should be spending?
Well, member states agreed to spend up to 3.5% or 5% in general for defense during NATO summit. Of course, the growth will be evolutionary till 2035, but member states agreed because they understand what is at stake. So the question is how we can finance in a more rapid way the defense needs in order really to meet the challenges of possibility of Russian threat, or what General Grinkiewicz was saying, that in 2027 we can face, both challenges on both sides, here on the European continent and in Indo-Pacific. So that is why I trust that member states seriously are ready to increase their defense spending and to take also responsibility for strengthening defense of Ukraine, because defense of Ukraine is very clearly the first line of defense of Europe. We cannot allow both Putin and Chinese leadership to think that the West is weak in defending, first of all, Ukraine. Because if they will make such a conclusion, then aggressiveness of them only will increase.
And when it comes to Ukraine, what are the lessons learned for the rest of the EU, especially when it comes to the longevity of that war and the stamina and will of the Russians in terms of the number of bodies they can throw at the conflict, how much they've been willing to sort of make sacrifices in their economy to fight this war, and what that means for what the EU needs to be prepared for?
Well, first of all, we need to learn a lot from Ukraine, and that is what we are doing. As I mentioned, a few days ago, we started a new joint platform together with Ukrainian government, with Vice Prime Minister Mikhailo Fedorov, who is digital minister also, and who took the leadership to create drone army in Ukraine. And so what we need to learn is not only how to produce drones, but also how to create totally different ecosystem around, with different procurement system, with different innovation system, in order for us really to be ready for whatever can come. And what can come, we need also to see with a very clear eyes. If predictions of our intelligence services will happen, if day X will come, and Russia will go for testing Article 5 with their aggression against any member of NATO or European Union member, we shall face a Russian battle-tested army, which is able to use millions of drones. And we do not have such an experience on our side. There are only another army on the European continent which has such an experience, which has battle-tested army and the ability to use millions of drones, is Ukrainian army. So that is why we need to learn from them a lot, and we need to see how we can bring them, as with all their added value, into our security architecture.
And the EU has taken significant steps to address defense industrial production. You've made changes in the procurement process, in financing. You mentioned the safe loans, and there's been other moves on that front. What are the next big challenges that the EU has to overcome when it comes to supercharging their defense industrial strategy, and what's the solution to address those challenges?
What we did during those 8 months, for myself, I'm saying we created conditions, at least the basis of conditions, financial, regulatory, in order really to implement what is needed to be implemented, to ramp up production and so on. Now we need to move into another stage, next stage, what I call delivery. Contracts, production, supply chains, and things like that. So that will be our priority now. And when we are looking into what we need to deliver, I see three major areas. What we need to produce. One area is what we call NATO capability targets, which were agreed in between of NATO and member states, with clear numbers how many new tanks, new artillery pieces, new guns and so on we need to have. Second area is what we call area of strategic enablers, where we are very heavily dependent for time being on American services, starting from space intelligence data and finishing with heavy airlift capability. So that is what we need to see as some kind of priority. And third area is what we call defense projects of common European interest, flagship projects, where they can be developed only with majority of European member states being in agreement of such kind of projects. For example, like air defense shield or regional eastern border defense shield. So those will be our priorities now, really to start to deliver those projects.
And in our remaining moments, I wanted to ask you about ITAR and some of the other things you mentioned that were challenges on the U.S. side of procurement and purchasing from American companies. What is your message to U.S. officials while you're here on that front? Are you pressing for certain changes in terms of how that is viewed, waivers or anything else that could be done to accommodate what the EU wants to accomplish?
Well, I am just saying what we see on European developments. That, especially recently, with, evidences when, with the previous administration even, in Ukraine, when Ukrainians were getting some weapons, for example, missiles, even not from the United States, from Great Britain, but those missiles were having American components. And when Ukrainians asked British government to give a permission to use those weapons against Russian territory, they were not getting that permission from American authorities. The same type of missiles provided by French government, but without American components, were used by Ukrainians, to target the targets in Russian territory. So that's what, Europeans see that. And that is, sending a signal that if you have, American-produced weapon, you can face some kind of those problems. So that is a message to American, industry and to American authorities to think about that. I don't know, I cannot, intervene into American legislation, how they should look into that. But in the European continent, again, I can repeat the same. We see how European companies are starting to use this language of advertising their products, that the products are ITAR-free.
Well, we'll see how that progresses along with the rest of your strategy. Thank you so much, Commissioner.
Thanks a lot.
Please welcome Robin Hayes, CEO of Airbus Americas, Lieutenant General Thomas Hollander, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for Rheinmetall Defence, John G. Clark, Senior Vice President of Technology and Strategic Innovation for Lockheed Martin, and Major General Darren Werner, President for Saper Transmission.
Thank you all for joining us. You can pick up your mics to answer the questions, and hopefully all of them will be working now. Since we have a lot of people on this panel and a lot to get to, I just wanted to dive in, and Robin, wanted to just start with you. As we look at the U.S. economic environment right now, we're all waiting to see the latest on U.S.-EU trade talks and whether that escalates or calms down. You've talked before about tariffs and other sort of challenges being a problem for companies like Airbus, especially after supply chains were already roiled after the pandemic. What does that mean now for defense industrial production, especially for you working at a European company, but in America?
Thanks for the question, and good evening, everyone. It's a very noisy crowd out the back, isn't it? Very noisy.
Yeah.
I want to hear is much better behaved. No, great to see everybody and seeing so many people here on a very important topic. Look, I think that tariffs have clearly been a significant issue that we are dealing with right now. You know, in our industry of aerospace, ironically, in my opinion, the biggest beneficiary of the tariff-free environment we've had since 1980 has been in the US. You know, the US exports over $6 in aerospace for every $1 it imports. And so, you know, I'm optimistic that we will get through this and hopefully quickly. In terms of Airbus's commitment to the US, I mean, we really have taken a very long-term view here. You know, we build airplanes here, we build military equipment here, satellites, we build helicopters here. And in fact, you know, we spend $15 billion in the US every year, supporting 275,000 jobs with over 2,000 US suppliers. And so it is a very integrated supply chain. And the reason the supply chain in our industry is so global really goes back to that 1980 agreement and why we need to get through this trade negotiation, hopefully come out of it with a 0% tariff for aerospace, which will benefit not just us, but all the US manufacturers too, and get on doing the important work that we're talking about here tonight.
Yeah, and sorry, it is a bit loud out there. Could someone from the Semafor staff just help with the crowd outside, just so we can hear the folks in here?
If you shut down the bar, everyone will
shut down the drinks.
I tip.
No, thank you for that, Robin, because that is obviously, I think, weighing, you know, on a lot of people's minds. But Darren, I wanted to turn to you as also an executive at a European company, looking at now this 5% pledge that we just heard about recently. What has that done for your company's views about the art of the possible, what that means for ramping up production to meet those goals and sort of balancing, you know, some of the America First mantra that we've obviously heard a lot here since the current administration took over versus the needs that the EU and Ukraine have?
Thanks for the question, and I just want to say, Dr. Brown, it's great to have you here. It's an honor to have you in the audience with us today, so thanks for being here.
Yeah, and looking great for 101 years old, by the way, so.
So thanks for the question, and the heart of the issue for the defense industrial base in the United States is revitalization. And it's a global effort. You know, when we look at our adversaries across the globe, they are working either individually or in concert to develop and establish capabilities that we here in the U.S. and maybe our allies in Europe and other countries across the globe may not be able to keep up with the pace. So for us globally, when we look at what we have to do to ensure the defense industrial base is relevant and reliable, we have to invest. And the investments are being impacted by the tariffs. That could go on for a significant amount of time, or it could end abruptly. And we're all hoping that it's the latter, not the former. The tariffs do have an impact, and it does have an impact on a company like Sapa Transmission, which is growing and building capacity in the U.S. Rapidly. We've brought technology onshore onto the U.S., and we're looking at advanced manufacturing, advanced casting, advanced forging operations, and we're bringing that and establishing it onshore in the U.S., consistent with the administration's ideas and their policies. This is giving us the opportunity to reinforce the defense industrial base and really provide options for not only U.S. Original equipment manufacturers, but also OEMs around the world.
Yeah. And Thomas, given your long experience in the Army, in the U.S. Army, especially when it comes to budget issues in particular. How has that informed your role at Rheinmetall when it comes to procurement, knowing that the EU is looking to ramp up, and obviously Ukraine still has many, many needs as well?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, great to see everybody, and real privilege to be here. Dr. Brown, sure, I'm honored. Thank you so much for your many years of service. And oh, by the way, I got some friends here in the audience. They're all looking at me, wondering what the heck I'm doing up here, because I was a money guy for forever. But when you talk about the 5%, you talk about defense funding and everything, and it's every day in our face at American Rheinmetall, whether it's at the tactical level with some program or some project that we are trying to see if there's going to be adequate funding for, or if there's an adjustment at a higher level, and how that's going to resonate across all of the different requirements that are competing for defense funding. So it is a daily examination of what's going on here in the National Capital Region, here in our federal government. Totally immersed in it.
Yeah, and John, for you, coming at this from Lockheed Martin, which obviously is a huge defense company, but also in your space of looking at venture investments as well. We've seen, whether it's in Ukraine or the recent attacks in Iran and the retaliation, how important systems like the Patriot air defense setup and other sort of more traditional assets still are in military theaters, in addition to, you know, drone technology and robotics and other innovations. So how are you looking at both sides of the ledger, if you will, in terms of sort of traditional military assets and some of the new innovations when it comes to what Lockheed wants to invest in?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and really excited to talk to this audience about, you know, topics like this. The balance that we're trying to strike is that we're looking at how existing systems that have gone through the rigorous process of testing and guaranteeing that they're going to work in endgame, how important that is, and then balancing that with the agility that's necessary with an adversary that's changing things every day. And so based on that, what we're doing is that we're taking our investments in these Lockheed Martin ventures. We have a $400 million fund that we go and invest in a myriad of small companies to go explore how we can see the new technologies getting introduced and then apply them to some of our legacy systems, as well as new systems that may come about. And so we're looking at how we can bridge those two environments so that we can get the benefits of tried and true proven technology that is proven to work, while also embracing the new technologies that's coming down the pipeline. And I think that the events that happened with Iran and the counter response in Qatar, and seeing THAAD and PAC-3 and all those systems in action, while it made for an interesting YouTube video, at some level you have to take a step back and know, hey, they were confident in how that stuff was going to perform. And we need that in every warfighter's hands on the good guy's side, to know that what we're putting in their hands, it's going to work every time, so that they all can come home safe. And I think that's one of the things that, as we watch the innovation that's happening in Ukraine and how rapidly they're innovating, the challenge is existential with respect to what's happening. It really, unfortunately, has turned into a war of attrition, and you're losing a lot of human capital on both sides. And I think we have to maybe escalate or take a step back from that and find out, how can we take some of these more tried and true technologies, apply them in that type of environment, such that you can actually create an imbalance toward our side. And in fact, you think about, one of the things that I mentioned earlier in a roundtable is the fact that, what would things look like if air dominance existed over the Ukraine? And the Ukrainians had air dominance, and they were able to impart their will on the adversary from that, how does that change things? Does that drone warfare now take a different shape? It still exists and the innovation still happens, but now it's shaped in a different way. And then I would argue in our favor.
Yeah. Well, and Robin, I wanted to ask you, especially because you've seen it a bit from the other side in your previous role as CEO of JetBlue, the pace of actual deployment and delivery. There's always, the push and pull of how soon governments want certain assets. Obviously, you're dealing with a lot of, red tape often, or regulations that can slow things down. Obviously, tariffs, supply chain, other issues that slow down production. What is your message to officials now of if they want to spend much more money, they want to speed up deployment, what do you need from them to make that happen?
That's a great question. I've got a countdown clock here, so I'm going to do my answer in a minute and give everyone else another minute. But no, look, I think the one thing I would pick is I think the 5% or the 3.5 plus 1.5 is, was a historic moment. But history will judge us in terms of what we do with that, what capabilities we deploy, and what difference it makes to the world. Obviously in our defense capabilities, but also in Europe, we're building that industrial base, creating new job opportunities, making sure everyone in Europe feels that they are benefiting from it. Because ultimately, we're in a time of elevated global tension. There could be a scenario where things get resolved and a lot of the population feel there's less pressure, and governments are going to come under a lot of pressure to spend money on other things. So it's really about sustaining it. So, yes, there's always all the challenges of scale and Europe being quite a fragmented market from both in the supply and demand side, but it's also sustaining this commitment over time.
And Darren, in terms of the on the R&D front, especially with the facilities that your company has in Michigan and elsewhere, where are you seeing areas for possible collaboration when it comes to R&D and advancements and certain technologies, maybe like sandboxing certain systems, especially given how much has been learned just from Ukraine alone?
Yeah, so much has been learned from the operations in Ukraine. It's almost across the board. If you have any manufacturing that's going on right now, there is a method or a process that can be expedited. It can be artificial intelligence and machine learning can be applied, and you can advance the manufacturing capabilities using traditional methods as well as new methods. In material science, so many different areas have been opened, and we continue to find improvements. There's so many universities and companies that are diving in on material science and finding metal solutions that we just haven't been able to explore before. It's exciting to be able to see different technologies in casting, in mist casting, and 3D printing, and bringing that all to a level of capability that's consistent with production rates. And then it gets back to my original conversation, which is it's really how we do that together as a global community focused on our free world, saving the free world from what is out there. And we can do that using the methodologies and the techniques that are out there, and then sharing it across different industries. I mean, as we manufacture in today's world, flexible manufacturing is absolutely the way to go. We're building capabilities right now that we can manufacture our primary core products, but we can also flex and we can shift in a short period of time and produce materials for the Marines, or for the Navy, for the Air Force. We have that capability.
Yeah, and John, continuing on that train of thought when it comes to R&D, and we'll talk more to the next panel about AI and quantum and various other technology that's coming up on the horizon. But in terms of what you've seen from the battlefield in Ukraine and some of the, again, traditional assets, I mean, they're producing many more mortars than they have in the past, because that is still what is needed, you know, to fight the day-to-day battlefield. How is technology like AI, like quantum, sort of changing up the equation of what could be possible in the future?
Yeah, in both instances, you know, artificial intelligence, the machine learning elements, and then the underlying computing infrastructure that it may ride on, whether that's quantum or, you know, just GPUs or TPUs. The core element of that is that you're making decisions much faster. In fact, you know, I'll come back to, you know, the construct with respect to innovation, that we talk about innovation in Ukraine happening much faster. And candidly, I don't think that there is a novel construct with respect to the innovation cycle that's happening there. It's the existential nature of what happens when you calculate risk. They have something happen. They understand that they have to make a countermeasure, and they don't have the option to go study it any longer. They have to make a decision right then. And I think that comes back to the point that was just made, that, you know, with a lot of money flowing into the system, we need to make sure that it's not spent on bureaucracy, studying problems. I think that the peace dividend is, unfortunately, across both the US and the EU, in the infrastructure that's been put together and the defense ecosystem that exists, is that there's always more time to go study something, and that innovation gets hampered as a byproduct of that. And so I think that, you know, AI and quantum, all those elements are going to help make decisions faster, but we need to make sure we don't fall into that morass of let's go study it a little bit longer, let's make sure it's exactly right, because that's our natural tendencies. When we think we have time, we may not have time.
Yeah, and Thomas, I'll leave the last word with you. Again, given your experience in the U.S. Army, especially with the demands on U.S. defense spending, whether it's in Asia, whether it's in the Middle East. Obviously, there's a lot of competing interests there. Now, with the EU really looking to step up, how are you telling your colleagues at Rheinmetall how to kind of navigate this landscape, at least in the U.S. market?
I can do this. So what I'm telling them is, it's a really complex fiscal environment right now. Okay, it's really hard to know what the heck is going on, because you got 25 are under continuing resolution. President Bud 26 is up on the Hill. We're just working through a $156 billion reconciliation bill. And how do you've got to take the time to look into what is being asked for, and it's not that clear in some cases. Got to follow up and ask the right questions to the right people to try to understand what is the true the true play here. So it takes a lot of effort, and it takes quite a measure of time and study to really try to understand what's going on here. Otherwise, you'll miss it. Something will happen. You think you're on solid ground, and you'll miss something.
Yeah, and as we've seen in DC, there's been a lot of one step forward, two steps back. So hopefully we'll see some more progress on that front. Thanks to all of you for your time.
Please welcome Rimantas Zelius, Senior Counsellor for Palantir, Jennifer McCardle, Director for Helsing Inc., Hannah Thoburn, EUCOM Strategy Director for Angeril, and Katerina Michalko, Director General of TechForce in Ukraine Association.
I love it. We have a panel of almost all women, so you get to be the lucky one on here. Thank you all for joining us. Wanted to ask Katerina just about Operation Spiderweb, because that was such a huge breaking news of the capabilities, the geographic breadth of those attacks, and what that says about drone warfare, the future of it, and how that translates into then production needs, and what Ukraine still needs on that front, especially as Russia is being predicted to also be stepping up on that front, and then we'll soon be able to send volleys of drones, about 2,000 or so in one showing.
Thank you for having me here tonight. I came from Ukraine, and I have lived in Kyiv all my life, actually, and when the full-scale invasion started, I didn't want to change the place where I live, and then I think about having work trips here in the United States that I could sleep through night, because here is no missile strikes or drone strikes in Washington, D.C., fortunately. And since the full-scale invasion, Kyiv experienced like 1,700 air alerts, and each night Russia starts from 300 up to 700 Shaheeds and drones through one wave to Kyiv, and I experienced most of them. So the thing which is scaring me that there is no technological limit for Russia not to start the same attack to other countries in the European Union, which also have the border with Russia, such as Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, etc. And I myself, I'm 1/4 Lithuanian, and when I'm imagining how like 300 Shaheeds are coming to Vilnius, for example, one night, it's scaring me. And imagine it happens one night, next night, third night, and what is the plan by European Union and NATO countries? What is our technological answer? And Ukrainian has this technological answer, and we are developing interceptors. We are developing this whole robotic solutions in all domains all the time, because it's so important to replace people with robots in the front line. Because Russians, they could send millions of their soldiers to the battlefield, they are losing people, but it's not an option for Ukraine, because we value human life. So the most important thing for our right now is maximize production capacities using Ukrainian experience. And we see this ideal triangle through European Union, US, and Ukraine, when we could gain components, import components from United States, localize production line in European Union with their funding using Ukrainian experience. Because the most valuable thing about Ukrainian it's experience, not technological part, because it's pretty easy to maximize your production capacities having financial resources, but Ukraine already paid with our lives to develop this type of technologies. So we will be glad for Europeans not to lose their lives, but use Ukrainian experience to maximize their production capacities.
No, and thank you for traveling all the way here to talk about this. Jenny, I wanted to ask you also about drone technology, where a lot of it has been focused on aerial drones, but Helsing is also looking at the security risks in the Baltic Sea. We've seen underground cables cut and damaged. Obviously, a lot of concern about that theater as well, and there's drone technology that's also underwater as well as aerial. I wanted to get a sense from you, given the future of this technology, how Helsing is viewing this space, and where you're seeing investor interest to try to fund all of these capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Clearly, the geopolitical situation in the Baltic Sea is tenuous. You mentioned the undersea cable cutting. Of course, there's a 2022 Nord Stream incident or sabotage. And then there's always the specter that conflict could horizontally escalate beyond Ukraine into, say, the Baltic Sea, where you could see Russian naval assets theoretically blocking off key choke points, holding NATO assets at risk. And so this creates a lot of challenges. And then when you think about the Baltic Sea generally, from a topographic and a hydrographic standpoint, there's also unique challenges. So obviously the topography, you're looking at archipelagos, islands, the seabed of the Baltic Sea, you've got dirt, you have sand, rock, and this creates unique ways for submarines to hide. Hydrographically, you have differing types of salinity, different stratification, which means from an acoustic standpoint, it's very challenging for sound propagation. And so this is really interesting because it creates these unique ways about thinking about the hider-seeker complex. So in the past, we've always taken this platform-based approach. We use exquisite systems to find exquisite systems. Now that paradigm is changing, where you can use sensors en masse to get after this problem set. And that's where Helsing is really situated. So we've developed a novel acoustic model called Lura. It is 10 times more performant at discerning low signature acoustic sound. It is 90% more performant at discerning between sister vessels, and then it is 40 times faster than other systems that you could use. So for instance, like tow-to-rate systems to quickly attribute surface or subsurface threats. So you take a sensor system like this, and all of a sudden you're able to take this big data, AI-based approach to this problem set. Now we're deploying that on a low-cost solution, so a glider, and you can deploy these in mass. So you can create these persistent sensing meshes in the region. So you mentioned, drones in the air, so UAVs, like that obviously has brought transparency to the battle space. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring transparency to the subsurface domain.
Got it. And Hannah, for Anduril and what it's been doing, obviously on the American front with your work with the Defense Department, but also helping the EU and Ukraine as well. And I want to get a sense from you where you see those investments headed, especially with advancements in AI, but also the knowledge that the enemy also has access to this technology. There are a lot of risks to security vulnerabilities as this technology advances. And so how are you thinking about augmenting capabilities, but also being very aware of, what Russia or other adversaries are also able to do?
Yeah, so Anduril really began with this idea of trying to create a startup defense company that would attract software engineers from places, that we see in Silicon Valley, Alphabet, Meta, and attract them to working on a national security set of issues. And as we're thinking about an expansion into Europe over the next years and months, we're also looking to find those kinds of individuals. And it really is individuals and education and a motivation to want to work on those problems. You're right. Russia does have a large amount of people really working at probably a faster pace than we in the West are to develop these drones, to develop what they're throwing every day at the Ukrainians. And we are going to have to learn how to be faster. But that does mean that it's going to be up to companies like ours to really work, yes, within the educational system, but also with governments here in the US or in Europe to build out a system that offers something to young people who want to do something interesting with their careers. This is about building a kind of defense ecosystem that, in a way, claps back a little bit against the kind of almost forced servitude of working for the Russian state or working for the Chinese state. And that's not to say that, you know, finding the right people is a panacea to it all, but it is something that we as societies, as Western societies, really need to look towards.
Yeah, and Romantis, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the perceptions of the sort of European defense tech ecosystem, you know, a lot of American companies and European ones as well complain about sort of the regulatory environment. You have the EU AI Act and other aspects that critics say stifle innovation. What has been your experience at Palantir in trying to also help them navigate this space?
It's kind of complicated question. In Palantir, we believe that the whole concept of the warfare changes in a way that it becomes much more driven by AI, much more software-centric. And this approach, probably, what you can say in Europe, what we see in Europe, is still lagging behind. When we see in US, there are already projects, major projects, which are software-centric, basically defining warfare first of all through lens of software, and only then designing how hardware will interact with it. In Europe, we still see that hardware is defining aspect, and probably it is very kind of still influenced with the regulation, where European companies and overall European market is kind of hesitant to be driven to implement AI-driven or AI-assisted solutions and so on. And what was discussion today with Commissioner, I think it was very relevant that Commission recognizes the burden of the regulatory environment, and the Defense and Space Commission's commitment to at least try to remove some of the burden on what concerns public procurement and so on, and what was addressed in the speech gives hope, but understanding the complexity of the and slowness of the European regulatory environment, I would say this a lot of punch will be needed to change that.
And Katerina, for your work, given your experience working at a UAV manufacturer in a previous role, and now what you do at TechForce, what is your message to the U.S. administration and officials here in terms of what Ukraine needs? You were talking about parts. Obviously there's funding, there's issues around certain weapons deliveries, but in terms of sort of the everyday fight and what you're seeing in your sort of day-to-day life, what are the most pressing needs?
For sure, as a Ukrainian, I want to say that let's protect democracy together, let's be united. But here is a very practical thing about working with Ukraine. If you are an arm producer from the United States and your products are not tested in the battlefield in Ukraine, you couldn't be sure that this thing is really working. We in Ukraine, we do not develop something in labs. we develop these solutions in the battlefield, so that as US producer of components or of arms, it's really important to get inside Ukraine, to have a localized maybe production lines or teams who work like in the battlefield and who get feedback from our soldiers, because only in this way you will be able to be strategically useful to develop, to protect your national security. So it's really important for private enterprises to be localized to Ukraine, to be operated in Ukraine, such as Helsinki. It's a great example of a company which has a local team who hire Ukrainians and who create a solution which really works.
And in our remaining moments, Jenny and Hannah, I want to ask you, in terms of the procurement process and various things that the EU has done to sort of streamline it, but obviously there's more work to do on that front. What are really quickly just some things that officials and governments should keep in mind when it comes to the kind of products and software that you're producing when it's not an F-35. It's not this huge military asset that is necessarily going to take, years and years to build and deliver. What do you want them to consider as the battlefield moves to, software to underground acoustic sensors and various other new technologies?
So yeah, we're definitely in an era of software-defined hardware. But I'd say when we're thinking about unmanned systems, we're also talking a lot about precise mass. And so if you're thinking about procuring an uncrewed system and you're just thinking about the platform itself, you're doing it wrong. You need to think about that product as the platform, the supply chain, and actually how you're actually producing that. Because that has a difference when you're trying to produce at mass. And so if you're talking to companies and they have not shored up their supply chain, if they don't have a manufacturing process that allows them to produce in mass, it doesn't matter how good their technology is, you're going to have a few systems in the field, but it's not going to get after the problem set that we really need to get after. And I think that's what's going to differentiate the companies that are going to matter and that will really support the Ukrainians, because they've gotten after that entire problem set and they've thought about that as a full product versus those that are just putting prototypes and R&D out into the field.
And Gina, I think from Anduril's perspective, I would give you two answers. First is modularity, and second is partnerships. And for us, these really go hand in hand. On modularity, we're talking about being able to make, as Jenny says, a large amount of the things that a country like Ukraine needs to defend itself at scale very quickly. And we can do that, and what Anduril is looking to do is in partnership with European countries. So this means we can take a cruise missile, we can make it out of maybe dual-use parts, and work with a European company. We recently announced a partnership with Rheinmetall to put in a European sensor, a German payload. We can use munitions from Sweden or something from someplace else in the European Union to make it more pertinent to their mission set. And so we're looking to do both of those things to push the fight forward.
And very quickly.
And if I may add, what's important, I think, what our time defines, that procurement should not be anymore about technical specifications. It should be about something that works. And so it means different kind of procurements where demonstration and actually working things should be bought.
Yeah, speed is of the essence. Yeah, thank you to all of you.
Please welcome David McAllister, Chair for the European Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee, Massachusetts Democratic Representative Bill Keating, Ranking Member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee's Subcommittee on Europe and Member of the House Armed Services Committee, and Morgan Chalfant, Semafor's Deputy Washington Editor.
Thank you both for being here. We don't have a ton of time, so I'm just going to jump right into questions. I wanted to just start first with trade tensions. They're obviously high between the U.S. and the EU. How does that affect the security relationship? If I can hear from you first, Chair McAllister.
Well, they started it. Well, we have a new deadline. And of course, we're in, who knows, perhaps the final phase of negotiations. I would say in general that allies are allies, and allies should also be treated in a different way when it comes to trade than other countries. We in the European Union have no interest at all in a trade conflict with the United States, so we're still working on finding an acceptable solution for both sides of the Atlantic. One thing is clear, our companies on both sides of the Atlantic need predictability, they need planning security, and we do hope that we can still find an agreed solution with our American allies and partners.
And Congressman, to you, I mean, are you worried about the trade tensions bleeding into other parts of the relationship?
Well, certainly the tariffs themselves are a lose-lose proposition. And I don't think there's any economic expert really that would counter that. So this is just not inflicting hurt with our allies. It's internally hurting ourselves here in this country in terms of that uncertainty. My perspective is one that, for those of you that might remember TTIP, I actually was the chair of the TTIP caucus. I think we should be moving in a different direction. And from a political standpoint, it's interesting. I had a Republican member of Congress who was also ex-military, and he just said, I can't understand what's going on. There's been a complete inversion. The Democrats are for free trade in places like Europe. The Republicans are for tariffs. The Republicans, at least a sector of them, aren't for a strong presence against Russia. The Democrats are. So you've seen this inversion, but the uncertainty is internal as well. But the way to go clearly is not through a tariff war. And based on the way this is being conducted on a mercurial or just incoherent way, the uncertainty is just magnified. And ultimately, even though China has been a focus of U.S. concern, we're playing into their hands, I think.
And if I can say with you, Congressman, we've talked a lot and heard a lot tonight about the amount that Europe is contributing to and spending on its own defense. The administration has obviously made clear that it wants Europe to take care of its own defense, and the administration's looking at shifting more towards China. Do you agree with that? Do you think the U.S. should be pulling back from Europe in favor of looking at Asia instead, or other security situations?
Well, looking at it from the prism of history, you can go back before President Eisenhower and talk about the fact that the U.S. had a policy standpoint of view that Europe should be self-reliant on its defense. And then you had the segment with de Gaulle where he wanted to venture out on his own, but those things still are with us. The reality is this, that President Trump is transactional, he's focused on numbers, and the reality that we have to deal with, and those of us, I think, on the Armed Services Committee, those of us concerned about defense in Congress, is not to look at the rocks that we have to navigate through every day, but rather the big course here. Europe's move to be more self-reliant and the U.S. effort to still be an indispensable partner. Those things coexist. And if we do this right and it's implemented right with the investments in Europe and the U.S. working with our allies, it could be a win-win. But the tariffs and the other things that you mentioned just divide us and cause greater, not just greater uncertainty, but a greater acrimony. Some of the language, some of the things that cabinet officials have said to our closest allies, the horrific terms, are certainly something that there's just no place for, not just in terms of diplomacy, but in terms of being real friends.
And Chairman McAllister, where do you see things going? Do you think that it is possible that at some point in the not too distant future, Europe is fully supporting its own defense, not relying on the U.S., or do you think there will always be a role for the U.S. to play?
I would like to first of all acknowledge the presence of nearly a dozen members of the European Parliament who are here tonight. We have two committees, the Committee on Budgets and the Committee on Foreign Affairs, who are in the United States all week, once again trying to strengthen transatlantic ties. And I think across political groups, we all agree as colleagues in the European Parliament, we have to do more for our own security and defense in Europe. I can fully underline what Commissioner Kubilius said. We have to do more. That means we will have to spend more. But we need to spend the taxpayers' money effectively, and that's why we will spend much more and invest much more together as Europeans. Perhaps you can summarize it, we're going to remain transatlantic, but we need to become more European. It's about strengthening the European pillar within the established framework of NATO, the transatlantic cooperation with the United States and Canada. And what we are going to do in Europe is not against NATO. It's not in competition with NATO. It's about strengthening the European pillar within the well-established NATO framework. I think that is the way forward. But one thing is absolutely clear. We are fully committed to the new defense targets, the new defense spending targets, which were agreed at the NATO summit in The Hague, and this will definitely change Europe. And the final point, we are not doing this because the US administration is expecting us to do this. We're doing this because there is a real serious threat in Europe, and that is the Russian Federation under President, or may I say, dictator, Mr. Putin.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I did want to ask about Russia. And how likely do you think it is that Europe could be at war with, or the EU could be at war with Russia in the near term? I mean, how worried are you about that?
Well, Commissioner Kubilius mentioned the intelligence we have from the German services and others, that the Russian Federation is working on having the capabilities to possibly attack a European member of NATO by the end of this decade. It doesn't mean that they will do so, but they are working on having these capabilities, and we need to be ready. We need to deter. We need to step up our own defense. The Russian war of aggression against Ukraine is not simply the largest country in Europe, size-wise, invading the second largest country size-wise, Ukraine. This war is much more. It's a fundamental attack on the European peace and security architecture. It's a fundamental attack on the rules-based international order. And this outcome of this war will have a huge impact on us in Europe, but the entire world. And that's why the brave women and men who are defending Ukraine every day, every week, every month, are not only defending their own country, their own territorial sovereignty, their own liberty, they are defending the European peace and security architecture. And that's why I strongly, passionately believe we don't only need to support Ukraine as long as it takes, but we need to support Ukraine whatever it takes to bring this country into a position that Mr. Putin realizes that he cannot win this illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. That will be the first condition for finding a peace negotiation, and in the end it needs to be a just and sustainable peace. That is what's at stake, and that's why we in Europe are fully aware that the Russian Federation and the dictator Mr. Putin is a serious threat, and we need to deter this threat together with our American allies and partners.
Congressman, I'll give you the last word with this question on Ukraine. I'm wondering if you think it's possible that the U.S. Congress will pass another Ukraine assistance package. Do you think that the last one that was passed will be the final one? Obviously, it's challenging in the current political environment.
Well, let me address a couple of things that David said, too. That, number one, I agree that it wasn't President Trump wanting more percentage of money for defense that really changed things in Europe. It was Ukraine and the threat of Ukraine. That brought people together. That made the energy changes that were decades happening in terms of discussion, but not happening realistically. Those hard decisions were made there. So, and in terms of the threat, from a U.S. standpoint, I feel very strongly that the threat is there for NATO. All you have to do is look at what the Russian Federation and Putin said just days before the February 22 invasion. He spelled out that his goals were not just Ukraine. He made very clear he wanted to disarm half of NATO, and he wanted assurances, and indeed, anything that would get in his way would be facing a real existential threat. And those frontline countries are the Baltics, Poland, and that's very real. And I think we sense that in the U.S. In terms of funding, let me look at this. There's been a change over the administrations. I don't think that's any kind of breaking news here. In terms of commitment to funding, it's important to look at the fact that in Congress, just this past week or two, that we had a defense authorization passed, and it passed in a bipartisan sense, 55-2. We also had an appropriations vote to cut Ukraine funding, and it didn't garner 20% of the people voting. However, when it comes to the funding issue, this administration has taken a stance that, that kind of funding should be done in Europe. Yet, I would say the majority of members of Congress, absent that kind of political pressure, still believe there's a need to fund that. So the timing of that, whether things change, we have a situation right now where President Trump's party controls the Senate, it controls the House, and of course he's got the presidency. It's very difficult to maneuver around that. But I must tell you, my view is, absent that kind of political pressure, we still have in Congress the majority that supports Ukraine that would support, given the opportunity, a funding package. The question is whether Speaker Johnson and the House side would even put that or entertain that kind of thing on the floor. So politics really in the minority, a stronger minority than there was, granted, but politics is playing a part in creating that kind of barrier to additional funding, which is in our interest. You mentioned Asia and the other parts of the world. Well, our Asia policy is one that should support transatlantic defense, because our Asian policy is one of deterrence. That's why we've put South Korea, Japan, that's why we put AUKUS, the Philippines. We've worked for those coalitions to deter. Nothing would send a message to President Xi about our inability and our lack of commitment to alliances than failing in Ukraine. And that's a reality. So when we look at what our Asia policy is versus our transatlantic policy, our European policy, our Russian and Ukraine policy, clearly, in my view, and I think the view of most people in Congress, that is one and the same. So that I hope that that carries forward when the support is necessary going forward.
Thank you both for this discussion, and thank you to the EU Defense Commissioner, the EU Ambassador, and our audience. This concludes our program, and so please join us for a reception.